the lead trainer here at Film Editing Pro, and I'm so glad that you're able to join us. You've made a great choice enrolling in this short training course, and I'm excited to share with you all the techniques and skills it has to offer. In this course, we're going to be exploring a pretty wide range of important creative editing topics, including the roles and duties of the editor, creating the perfect timeline setup, the essential skills of working with dialogue, and how you can carefully sculpt the performance of actors and actresses in a cut to make a scene work perfectly and achieve its primary goal. Then, we'll spend a bit of time with sound, learning how to focus a viewer's attention on what's most important. And finally, you'll watch as we completely change the events in an existing scene, crafting an invisible narrative without adding a single new shot or dialogue line. Our only tools will be sound design, Foley, and a bit of music. As you go through this course, I'd recommend that you write down a few notes here and there to remind you of things that are of particular importance to you. I like to use Evernote to keep track of my notes, to-do lists, and pretty much everything else under the sun. But a Word doc, OneNote, or even Notepad will do just fine as well. Coming up in the next lesson, we're going to look at the roles and challenges you'll face as a creative editor. We've got a lot to cover. Let's get started. As a creative editor, you're part of a rare breed of modern artists and craftsmen. You're a storyteller, a music editor, and a sound designer. You could also be expected to have some level of skill in motion graphics, visual effects, and color grading. That's a lot of responsibility for one person. As the editor, it's important to have a clear understanding of where you fit in the big picture of a film or project. What roles must you fill, and what challenges must you overcome? Let's begin by looking at your roles. Alright, so we're going to look at 4 incredibly important roles that almost every creative editor will need to fill. First, it's your job to remain impartial. The editor is the first audience member to watch a new film as it's pieced together one shot at a time. You'll need to regularly be able to separate yourself from the mindset of an editor and instead look at the film as your viewer would. Remember, good editing is often about empathizing, not only with the characters on the screen, but with how your audience feels. You need to be inside your viewer's head to editorially support the emotions they'll likely have when watching. For example, if they might find a moment funny, you should anticipate that and reinforce it with a supporting reaction from a character in the scene. Then, after the punchline or highlight of the gag is fully delivered, leave that little pause, just a bit of extra air in the cut so they can laugh and enjoy it. Any important information or story development that occurs while the viewer is reacting has a very strong chance of being missed, which will inevitably decrease their understanding and engagement as the film moves forward. Initially, this might be pretty easy. You've spent a few days putting together a handful of scenes, and it's exciting to experience the moments as they come to life on the screen. It's all still new. However, as days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months, and the versions and revisions really start to pile up, it's going to get a lot harder to look at something with fresh eyes. Below this video, you'll find a PDF called Watching Cuts Objectively. It includes a copy of some tips we've put together for staying impartial and objective when watching your cut, no matter how many times you've seen it. This, along with the other 2 PDFs you see, are from articles that we've previously shared on the Film Editing Pro blog. I wanted to give you quick access to them here, as they directly relate to the topics that we're discussing, and they go into a bit more detail. Even if you've already read them before, I'd suggest that you save a copy on your hard drive. Alright, so your second role as a creative editor is that of the director's or client's ally. It's up to you to support them, to align your goals with theirs, to be honest with them about problems, but gentle at the same time. Spend that extra 20 or 30 minutes here and there to really explore all the possible solutions to a problem, and to never ever settle for just good enough. Who's ever running the show, remember, this is their baby, They're placing it in your hands, and they're trusting you to stay true to their vision and to use your expertise to craft it into something special. You always need to respect that and treat it as if it were your own. That's the mark of a true professional. Third, it's your job to act as a custodian or protector of the actors and actresses in a film or project. Everyone has bad takes, or even bad days. But, as the editor, you have the power to cut scenes in a way that hides an actor's shortcomings and highlights their strengths. Sometimes this can be a tough job, and you'll need to call on all your editorial skills to save a bad performance. Other times, when you've got an award-winning actor on your hands, you just need to stay out of the way. And fourth, you must also fill the role of a master craftsman. So what exactly does that mean? Well, for one, it means not cutting corners. With most projects, you're going to be given mountains of footage. It's tempting to quickly skim it all, pick some shots that seem to work pretty good, and move forward. I can tell you right now, that's incredibly lazy, and at least in my book, it's more than enough reason to get rid of an editor and award the job to somebody who actually cares about the project and wants to give it their all. Take pride in your craft. Spend the time to review all the footage. Smooth out your music edits. Try multiple versions of a cut until it works perfectly. Find the right sound effect for a moment, not just the first one you dig up on your drive. All these attributes are what make the difference between a professional, well-respected, and well-paid editor and everyone else. Alright, so those were some of the roles we need to play as a creative editor. Now, let's dig deeper into the major challenges that make that difficult. To start, every craftsman has the obvious challenge of working with their chosen tool. In our case, that's our software. It really doesn't matter what program you're using. Avid, Premiere, Final Cut, DaVinci Resolve, they'll all do what you need them to do. Just remember that before you can become a great editor, you need to be comfortable enough with your chosen software so that it fades into the background and allows you to focus on the task at hand, being creative and telling a great story. A tip for anyone just starting out: don't get too bogged down with learning all the crazy features that your program has to offer right away. Most of them you're probably never going to use. At the end of the day, 95% of your editing can simply be accomplished if you know how to cut footage and audio onto the timeline, move it around, adjust levels, and drop in the occasional filter or effect. Our second big challenge as editors is how to deal with problems with your source materials. Depending on the caliber of project you're cutting on, your biggest footage problem might just be deciding which amazing shot to use where. If that's it, lucky you. It's far more common to realize in the editing room that you're missing coverage of that insert shot where we clearly see a character reading something important. Or maybe the lav mic in an actor's shirt is full of distortion and cloth rustling, ruining the audio on a key dialogue bite. Or maybe the footage lacks any strong shots to use for opening the scene, or for transitioning out of it. These are the types of challenges you're going to face every day as an editor. Challenge number 3. Dealing with notes and opinions. Filmmaking is a very collaborative process. You've got a huge number of people all working toward the same goal. Editing, on the other hand, can feel a bit more like a solo endeavor. After all, you're locked in a dark room, usually by yourself, with the entire project seemingly under your control. Well, don't be misled. The editing process is still a team sport. You've got the director, the producers, clients, actors, and focus groups, all with opinions and suggestions on how to make the final product the best it can be. You need to be open to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the editor isn't always right. Now, version 1, usually that's yours. Take your knowledge of story, the director's vision, the goal of the project, and confidently cut something to the best of your ability. Trust your gut here, have an opinion, and offer your unique perspective as you carefully piece everything together. After version 1 though, be prepared for feedback. It's arrogant to think that you're hitting home runs every single time on version 1, so there's a decent chance that notes are actually going to improve the cut. One of the hardest parts about dealing with notes isn't the actual execution of the changes. It's continuing to care about them when you're on version 25 35, or even 45. I can tell you from experience, though, that one of the marks of a true professional is that you approach your cut with the same passion, care, and craftsmanship on version 45 as you did on version 1. Below this video, you'll see another PDF called Director and Client Notes. In it, we dive deeper into suggestions on how to handle director and client notes professionally, and how to make sure you don't end up misinterpreting them and chasing your tail for 2 hours. Make sure you give it a read and save a copy on your hard drive for reference. Alright, Challenge 4. Dealing with tight deadlines and pressure. Editing is hard enough as it is. Editing under pressure is infinitely harder. When you find yourself loaded with a mountain of work and a short amount of time to do it, most people will probably do one of two things. Either they'll start working faster, or they'll panic and freeze. Panicking is obviously a massive problem, and you'll just need to get past that. That much is obvious. But believe it or not, working faster can be just as much of a curse. Every client or director wants to work with a fast editor. But what exactly does fast mean? Well, it could mean that you're quick on the keyboard or the mouse. You've mastered your software, and you know how to manipulate your footage and audio at a rapid-fire pace. That's all great, as long as you're simultaneously making the right editorial decisions. Which brings us to the second type of fast. The best, fastest editors might not be a hot shot on the keyboard, but at the end of the day, their cut is successfully completed on or ahead of time because they have the experience and the foresight to make smart editorial choices and get most things right the first time, or at least the second. All the frantic, lightning-fast decisions and haphazard edits don't mean a thing when you realize it doesn't work and you have to hit undo 97 times. Below this video is another PDF. This one is called Deadlines and Pressure. In it, we lay out some specific tips for dealing with tight deadlines and how to stay focused under pressure, like when you've got 4 people sitting behind you and watching over your shoulder while you work. In this lesson, we discuss the various roles you must play and challenges you'll need to face if you want to be a successful creative editor. Some of the roles we talked about included that of being an impartial viewer, staying objective, and watching your cut through the eyes of your audience. Next, we reviewed how and why you need to be your director or client's ally and support their vision with your skill and knowledge. Then, we explored your role as actor custodian, molding and shaping their performance to protect their integrity and cast them in the best light possible. And we discussed the editor as a master craftsman, and we talked a bit about how that will affect your workflow and decisions as you're cutting. And finally, we also reviewed some of the toughest challenges you'll face as a creative editor, not all of them technical, including dealing with software, problems with sources, receiving notes, and facing high-pressure situations and deadlines. Coming up in the next lesson, we're going to start digging into the nitty-gritty details of being a creative editor by showing you how to design the perfect timeline setup. Alright, I'll see you in a bit. An artist has their canvas, a writer their manuscript, a weightlifter their body. But what do we as editors have that will show at a glance the hundreds of hours of focused effort we've poured into our creation? How do you view in a single image, one snapshot, a medium that's meant to be experienced in the 4th dimension, time? The answer? You really can't. But the next best choice is the editor's timeline. This arrangement of colored blocks is our canvas. It won't show the artistry of the edited piece itself, but it does reveal other things about our work. like duration, complexity, and thoughtful organization. Plus, they just look cool. Maybe that's why editors seem to be obsessed with sharing them. Hashtag Timeline Tuesday, anyone? So this all begs the question, is there such a thing as the perfect timeline? I would argue that there is, and it's based on these key elements. First, the timeline should be organized. You should have a system of where things go and not stray from it. Dialogue here, narration there, mono effects on certain tracks, stereo effects on others. Second, as I said, it should be consistent. Once you have your organization system, you need to stay true to it. Third, the perfect timeline should be understandable by others. This is a byproduct of consistency and organization, but it's important to mention. The timeline should allow for clear and effective collaboration with the rest of your team. That means any other editor or assistant should be able to pull it up and start working on it without needing you to explain how a jumbled mess of disorganized media made sense to you at the time. Even if you're a lone editor and you aren't working with the team yet, get in the habit of organizing your work as if you were. Fourth, the perfect timeline should reflect the workflow of your production. If you'll be passing visual effects back and forth with a vendor, plan for that in your timeline layout. If you'll be collaborating closely with a sound department or a composer, make sure that there's a designated space for their work and a way to quickly share your temp audio references with them. In short, consider how things will need to flow into and out of your timeline, and make sure it's arranged in a way that makes that as easy as possible. Fifth, the perfect timeline should function smoothly with your editing system and software. That means being aware of any performance limitations you're facing. Don't try to work with 99 audio tracks if your system is going to choke after 18. Are you going to use color coding? Will you work with the waveform visible or hidden? How large will your tracks be on your monitor? Now, one thing I want to mention is a bit of a disclaimer. The perfect timeline will vary a bit based on your specific situation. This module will be giving you a very solid template and starting point. Once you understand these best practices, you're absolutely encouraged to tweak and modify your own timeline to perfectly fit your needs and your style. But how's the old saying go? You need to learn the rules before you can break them. Coming up in the next lesson, we'll be teaching a professional system for arranging all of your video and audio tracks. Alright, I'll see you in a bit. Okay, so here we have our editing timeline. Let's begin with V1 and we'll work our way up. So here we have video layers 1, 2, 3, and 4. These are the workhorse layers, where most of the picture editing will be happening. This is where you'll be adding all your footage to craft the scene. You'll also be using these layers for adding simple effects from your editing software. That might include picture resizes, keyed effects, wipes, fades, dissolves, and on and on. Moving up, we've got V5. If your project contains any more complex, externally created graphics or visual effects, they'll go here. That includes things like green screens, rotoscoping, digital characters, and more. Generally, if you've got another team member or company responsible for supplying these pre-made visuals, assign them all to this track. On V6, we've got our temporary color correction and grading. You'll use this track to apply adjustments to all the video tracks beneath it. For example, you might want to add a large correction or grade across a large group of shots. Or you might just need to apply an exposure fix to only a handful of shots. This track is where you'll do all of that. So V7, this is where we'll add our matte. Whether you're working in 16:9, 1:8:5, 2:3:5, or any number of other aspect ratios, it's a good idea to add a true black matte across the footage. This is going to give a more consistent viewing experience for you and your client, director, test audience, what have you. Now, above V7, this is where we've got visuals that you might want to turn on and off for various reasons. By placing this content above our matte layer, we can simply monitor below if we don't wish to view or export what's on these tracks. So what is on these tracks? Well, on V8, we've got subtitles. This is where you'll typically add text from your editing software to caption any sections of footage either spoken in a language foreign to your audience, or that might be difficult to understand in an interview or documentary format. And finally, on V9, we've got a layer of titles with information about our various visual effects. That includes shot numbers, version numbers, and any other information you and your team use for tracking. Of course, this layer only applies if you're using visual effects. The higher we go up through our layers of video tracks, the less likely it is you'll need to use them. On complex projects with larger teams and high-end VFX, you'll use them all. On simpler projects, possibly even those being cut from final, color-corrected footage, you might only use tracks V1 through V4. Whichever scenario you find yourself in, these 9 video layers will cover all your bases. Alright, now let's take a look at our audio tracks. So, first a word about track order here. The tracks are arranged from top to bottom in the order you'll be cutting them. You'll be cutting dialogue first as you structure out your scene. Then, you'll build out some of your sound effects and your ambience, and then finally you'll add music, temp or otherwise, if the scene requires it. Alright, so starting with A1 through A3, we've got 3 tracks of mono dialogue. Why mono, you ask? Or maybe you don't, but I'll tell you anyway. Dialogue is almost always recorded mono to eliminate any potential problems that might arise from a stereo recording. Dialogue recorded in stereo is asking for trouble, as you'll be open to problems related to phase issues like this, interference like this, and incredibly distracting sound placement of the voice, as it could potentially waver right and left depending on the exact microphone location on the set. Dialogue and other simple effects like Foley will typically be sent to the center channel. If you need to simulate any subtle effects that are typically afforded by stereo audio, you can add these later in the mix. Most commonly, that will include a bit of reverb to help simulate an environment and realistically place a voice in the correct 3-dimensional space. On audio track 4, you can use this real estate for additional dialogue or narration if your project has it. Okay, moving down to audio tracks 5 through 8. On these tracks, you'll add your mono sound effects. Use these tracks for simple sound effects that don't benefit from a stereo recording. That includes mostly Foley and other simple effects like a door slamming shut, a dog barking, a tire screech. You get the point. Below these mono effects, you've got 4 more effects tracks on A9 through A12. So what's the difference between these and the previous 4? These tracks should be reserved for your stereo sound effects and your stereo ambience coming in with your production audio. Also, use these to add your own third-party stereo sound effects, like room tone, ambience, or sound design that you're adding to the cut. Remember, if your software can take both stereo and mono audio on the same type of track, all these sound effects tracks can be either one. You'll basically just have 8 effects tracks in a row. But if you're using something like Avid and you need your track type to match the mono or stereo sound specifically that's being added to it, make sure these are either added as 4 stereo tracks or 4 mono pairs, whichever matches the format of your production audio. Alright, so now that we have a home for all of our sound effects, it's time for music. You'll want to reserve tracks A13 and A14 for stereo music. If your scene doesn't have music, these will just remain blank. And finally, the last 3 tracks at the bottom of our timeline are A15 through A17. These are also stereo tracks, and their job is to hold the stems that you receive from the sound department. As your cut progresses, you'll likely be collaborating with a dialogue editor, a sound designer, and either a music editor or a composer. As you receive new and shiny, cleaned up versions of these elements of your mix, you add each stem here at the bottom. 1 for dialogue, 1 for effects, and 1 for music. For example, once you receive your cleaned up dialogue stem, you'll add it on A15, and then you'll mute tracks A1 through A4, containing your rough dialogue edit. The same with your sound effects on A16. You'll mute A5 through A12. And of course your music stem will live on A17, and you'll mute your rough music edits on A13 and A14. Okay, I know that was a lot of information to take in all at once. If you'd like a reference of this track layout, you can download the track layout PDF below this video. In this lesson, we walked you through a reliable and organized method for how to arrange your different video tracks on the timeline, from rough picture to VFX shots, subtitles, and everything in between. Then, we discussed how to arrange the various audio tracks you'll likely be using, and we learned how to make sure that they're laid out in a way that meets the needs of your editing workflow. Now that we've got all of our tracks arranged in a logical and systematic fashion, it's time to add a bit of color. Coming up in the next lesson, we're going to look at how color coding can make your timeline much easier to understand at a quick glance. Alright, I'll see you in a bit. As an editor, you'll want to look for opportunities to distinguish elements on your timeline with an obvious difference in color. This is going to help you tell at a quick glance exactly what it is you're looking at. To start, you'll want the color coding to be based on the source clip colors in your project. For example, you might want all Foley effects to appear orange on your timeline. So in your bin or folder, you'd want to change the clip or label color to orange. Now, we typically don't get much into software specifics in our training, since we like to keep a focus on the creative process. However, for this to work for you, you'll want to keep a couple things in mind. Each piece of editing software handles color coding a little bit differently. If you're using Avid Media Composer, be sure to add the color column to your bin, and set your timeline clip color to source. If you're using Adobe Premiere Pro, you'll be working with label colors. You can change these clip label colors in your bin, but you'll need to make sure you go to File, Project Settings, General, and check the box that says Display the project item name and label color for all instances. This will make sure that if you say go back into your bin and change all your Foley from orange to pink, it will update the clips already in your sequence. If you're using Final Cut Pro 10, you'll be working with the Rolls system, which behaves a bit differently than most other software, but is quite powerful once you get the hang of it. Specifically, you can filter and rearrange the content on your timeline by the assigned role, like titles, dialogue, or music. Whatever software package you're using, work within its available features to develop a system of color coding that makes sense to you. There are plenty of ways you can choose to assign your color coding, and it's going to be largely based on the ingredients involved in your specific project. First, let's eliminate all the existing color from our timeline. Then we'll add it back one piece at a time and discuss exactly how and why it's color-coded the way it is. This strategy will serve you well in a wide range of scenarios and is customizable to fit your specific project and workflow. We'll start at the top of our timeline and work straight down to the bottom. First, for our titles, subtitles, and matte, let's actually stick with these 3 shades of gray. We won't be interacting much with these layers, so it's not as important to have them stand out with a bright color. Let's save our actual color choices for the rest of our working tracks. Next, use one color to represent a finished visual effect, say the color of a green screen, and another to represent a work in progress. We'll go with yellow. Now, when it comes to your actual footage and synced audio, there are a couple of ways that you can use color coding to make your life easier. One method is to color code odd scenes one color, let's say blue for scenes 1, 3, 5, 7, etc., and even scenes another, like pink, for scenes 2, 4, 6, 8, and so on. This will help you quickly visualize the pacing of the film by clearly showing the length of each scene and how frequently you move from one to the next. This method is often the most useful. A second method you might choose is to assign colors based on characters. Maybe your protagonist is blue, your antagonist is dark green, your love interest is pink, you get the point. This is great for helping you tell at a glance who's getting the screen time and how often. If you go this route, just be careful not to let things get out of hand. If you assign 10 different colors to your various cast members, you're going to have a tough time making sense of it. If you're unsure of which method to go with, stick with color coding by even and odd scenes. It's the most straightforward and often works the best. Moving down your track layers, you've got your 8 layers of sound effects and backgrounds. I'd recommend assigning one color to all your Foley and sound effects, maybe orange, and another to all your backgrounds and ambience. How about teal? If you want to get really organized, you can use two different colors to alternate your ambiences by scene. This is helpful in keeping yourself geographically oriented when you're neck deep in audio layers. Remember, any backgrounds or sound effects you pull out of the production audio will match the color that you've chosen for that particular scene, as you can see here. Next, we give all temp music a color, maybe peach. And finally, we'll assign purple to our various stems, dialogue, effects, and music. And there it is, your completely organized, labeled, and color-corrected timeline. Obviously, feel free to choose any colors you like for each of these components, as long as you can easily tell the difference between them. It'll take you a bit of time to get everything arranged and set up in your software, but the time and the headache it'll save you while you're editing will more than outweigh the cost. In this lesson, we showed you how to color code your source footage clips either by scene or by character. We gave you some ideas on how you might consider color coding video tracks containing VFX, mats, subtitles, and color grades. And finally, we looked at the process of color coding our audio sources, specifically our layers of sound effects, backgrounds and ambience, temp music, and final audio stems that we might receive from the sound department. Coming up in the next lesson, we're going to look at 5 tips for working with timelines that'll save you headaches, late nights, and a lot of wasted effort. All right, I'll see you in a bit. All right, let's go over a few timeline tips you'll want to keep in mind while working. First, when you're labeling your timeline, or anything for that matter, I strongly recommend against using all caps. Using all capital letters results in a decreased contrast in letter size and shape, making text a bit harder to read. Just something to keep in mind as you set up your timeline and your projects in general. Next, you'll want to decide very early in a project how you'll be working with stereo versus mono tracks. We talked about this already in the audio track section, but it bears repeating. Some editing programs will allow you to place media on any track. For example, Adobe Premiere allows you to move a piece of single-channel mono audio from a mono track to a stereo track and vice versa. This is great and super flexible. You don't have to worry too much if that's how your software functions. Other programs, like Avid Media Composer for example, will only allow you to place mono media on mono tracks and stereo media on stereo tracks. That means you'll need to have a plan from the very beginning, which tracks will contain which type of audio. Splitting stereo tracks into dual mono tracks later on down the road is going to create a lot of confusion. And at least in current versions of the software, there's no good way of going from dual mono tracks back to a single stereo. As a general rule in Avid, I'd recommend considering working with your music in stereo tracks and keeping all your other tracks mono for maximum flexibility. Third, you'll want to keep the graveyard clean. What's the graveyard? Well, it's where the footage and the audio go to die. Specifically, it's the space at the end of your timeline, where editors will often put extra shots and dialogue while working, maybe some various attempts at different sections of the cut, and any other piece of media that doesn't necessarily have a home in the final piece. This area of the timeline can tend to get a bit crowded and cause a number of problems. For one, it adds to the file size of your sequence, and is a drain on your system's resources. This might not seem like a big deal at first, but when you're on version 42 of something, and you've duplicated the sequence each time with all its extra graveyard media, things start to get out of control pretty fast. And second, graveyard media can get confusing for other editors and assistants who need to work with your cut. It's not hard to imagine someone unfamiliar with your cut needing to output a QuickTime, marking an in to an out across your whole timeline, and accidentally exporting an extra 20 minutes of junk. Fourth, keep in mind that you can always add more tracks as needed. For example, in our timeline template, we allocate 2 tracks for cutting your stereo music. But at some point, you might find yourself working with the instrumental stems of a cue, meaning you'll have a track of percussion, a track of guitar, and so on. In this scenario, you'd be getting into some pretty heavy-duty music editing to really customize it to perfectly fit your cut, in the absence of a dedicated composer for the project. In this case, you're going to need a lot more music tracks. Feel free to add them. The same goes for sound design. If you're cutting something that needs more than the 8 tracks that we've dedicated to effects, add a few more and bump everything else down. On the flip side, try not to add more tracks than you actually need. You want to be able to fit all your tracks on your monitor without having to scroll up and down to see them all. I like to put my entire timeline full screen on a dedicated second monitor. This brings us to track size. Adjust the track size based on its specific editing function. So what does that mean? Essentially, the more fine editing you'll be doing with the track, the bigger it should be. Make your audio tracks a bit larger than your video tracks. And with your audio tracks, give a little bit more room to dialogue and music than sound effects. Now, this primarily applies if you choose to work with waveforms for your audio editing, where you'll want to see the syllables in the dialogue and the beats in the music. Also, don't be afraid to expand a track to be huge if you really need to do some detail work. You'd be surprised at how many editors try to finesse a cut without really being able to see what they're actually doing. Alright, so that pretty much wraps up our timeline module. Now that we've got a good plan for organizing and working with our tracks and media, it's time to go a bit deeper into the editing process. Coming up in the next module, we'll be jumping into the world of dialogue editing, beginning with some rules for working with different audio sources. Alright, I'll see you in a bit.